You know, I always thought betrayal was something that happened to other people. You hear stories over coffee with friends. Can you believe what happened to Linda? And you shake your head, maybe feel sorry for them, maybe even secretly think, that would never happen to me. I was one of those people. For 32 years, I wore my wedding ring with pride. I cooked his favorite meals, learned to like golf because he loved it, even tolerated his obsession with late-night crime shows. I wasn't perfect, Lord knows I have my flaws, but I believed in our marriage like I believed in gravity. Unshakable. Constant. It was a Thursday. Funny how the most ordinary days can become the ones that split your life into before and after. I was at the library where I worked, sorting through a stack of returned books. My head had been throbbing since morning, one of those headaches that makes your vision blur at the edges. By 2:15, I'd had enough. I told my coworker I'd lock up my section early, slipped my coat on, and headed for my car. Now race the first twist of fate, I never go straight home without calling my husband first. We have this little tradition, I'd text him on my way, he'd text back drive safe. But that day, I didn't. I figured he'd be busy with one of his endless conference calls in the home office. I pulled into the driveway around 2:40. His car was there, tucked close to the garage door. I remember thinking it was odd, because he usually parked a bit farther out so he could pull tools from the side shelves. Small detail, but my mind caught on it. The blinds in the living room were half closed. That wasn't unusual, but something about the stillness of the house felt off. Like the air was holding its breath. I stepped inside quietly. My shoes barely made a sound on the hardwood floor. I wasn't trying to be sneaky, my head just hurt too much to call out. I went straight to the kitchen, thinking about tea and maybe lying down for 20 minutes. Then I heard it. A laugh. Not my husband's deep chuckle. No. This was lighter. Higher. Definitely female. I froze. My brain tried to make sense of it. The TV? But we never left it on in the bedroom. Maybe he was on a video call? No, there was something intimate about the sound, something that didn't belong to work. I put my mug down without realizing I'd picked one up. My pulse was suddenly loud in my ears, drowning out the headache. I walked toward the hallway, each step heavier than the last. Halfway there, I heard voices. Not full sentences, just fragments, her giggle, his low murmur. And then silence. Followed by a sound I don't think I can describe without my stomach turning. The bedroom door was half open. My hand hovered near it. I didn't push it, I didn't have to. Through the narrow gap, I saw them. I wish I could tell you I misread it. That maybe they were hugging or something innocent. But no. What I saw was not something you can mistake. My husband, the man who'd held my hand in the hospital when our first grandchild was born, was there with a woman who looked at least 20 years younger than me. Her hair tumbled over his chest. His hands, God, I can't even finish that sentence. And they were so at ease. Like this wasn't the first time. Something in me shifted. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even make a sound. My hands moved before my mind caught up. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the camera, and hit record. I held it steady. My breathing slow, controlled, like I was outside my own body. I recorded every second. Not because I wanted to torture myself later, but because, in that frozen moment, I knew this wasn't just an emotional betrayal. This was going to be legal. This was going to be financial. And I needed proof. I don't know how long I stood there. When I finally pulled back, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might shake the phone from my hands. I didn't slam the door or confront them. Not yet. Instead, I walked back down the hallway as quietly as I had come. And here's the part that might shock you, I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table. And I waited. Because if my marriage was going to end today, I was going to choose how. You'd think that catching your husband with another woman would lead to screaming, throwing things, maybe calling the police right there on the spot. But that's not what happened. After I filmed them, I walked back into the kitchen like a sleepwalker. My hands were steady, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. The kettle hissed on the stove, and I just stood there, staring at the steam curling up, feeling like it belonged to another world. It wasn't shock in the way movies show it, where you faint or collapse. It was emptiness. A hollow space in my chest where something used to live. I kept thinking about the years. 32 of them. The Christmas mornings. The late-night talks when our son was in the hospital with pneumonia. The way he held my hand when my mother died. All of it, every single memory, now felt like a set piece on a stage. A performance. And I hated myself in that moment for thinking, was any of it even real? I sipped my tea while they were still in our bedroom. I knew because I could hear muffled voices and the creak of the floorboards. I could have walked in at any second, but I didn't. I was thinking bigger. This wasn't just about confronting him. This was about dismantling the life we'd built, carefully, methodically, and walking away with my dignity and my future intact. I'd seen too many women lose everything in divorce because they acted on pure emotion. I wasn't going to be one of them. That's when I started replaying the past in my head, and pieces began to click together. The sudden Thursday work-from-home routine that began 6 months ago. His phone always face down on the table. The quick showers right after long conference calls. Even the new cologne I hadn't bought him, the one he claimed a coworker gifted for Christmas. The signs had been there. I just hadn't wanted to read them. Because reading them meant accepting that my life wasn't what I thought it was. I thought back to a dinner 2 months earlier. Had been distracted, smiling at something on his phone while I was talking about our granddaughter's school recital. I remember snapping at him, asking if his phone was more interesting than me. Head laughed and said, "You're being dramatic." I dropped it. Now I wondered, was she texting him that very moment? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became, this wasn't some one-time lapse in judgment. This was a full-blown affair. And if I knew my husband, he wasn't going to admit it easily. That video in my phone was my insurance policy. It was the cold, undeniable truth that no amount of smooth talking could erase. But I also knew that if I played this wrong, if I confronted him without a plan, he could hide assets, twist the story, even turn our children against me. So I sat there for hours, letting the rage simmer into something sharper. I decided I wouldn't confront him that day. No, I'd let him believe I didn't know. I'd watch him lie to my face, come to the dinner table like nothing happened, kiss me goodnight without a hint of guilt. Why? Because every day he did that, every word he spoke, every alibi he gave I would remember. And when the time came, I'd have more than a video. I'd have a record of the man he truly was. It's a strange kind of torture, pretending you don't know. But I told myself this was the price of taking back control. When they finally left the bedroom, I heard her laugh again. It was lighter this time, carefree. The sound of someone who thinks they're getting away with something. I stayed in the kitchen, facing away from the hall, stirring my tea as if the world was perfectly normal. Inside, I was memorizing her voice. Her walk. The perfume that lingered in the air after they passed. I wanted every detail, because one day, those details would matter. And so began the longest week of my life, living under the same roof as a man I no longer recognized, carrying a secret that could burn everything down in seconds. By the end of that week, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Every smile he gave me felt hollow. Every word, rehearsed. I was watching a man I thought I knew, realizing I had only known a version of him. I didn't confront him immediately. I waited. Not because I enjoyed the torment, God, no, but because I needed clarity, control, and a plan. I knew that my reaction in the heat of anger could destroy more than him it could destroy me. The video on my phone became my constant companion. I watched it once, twice, maybe 3 times, just to remind myself of the truth I had captured. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about proof, about facing reality with eyes wide open. I thought about the life we had built together. Our children. Our home. Our friends. The neighbors who smiled politely as if everything was fine. The holidays, the family dinners, the vacations, all of it felt like a carefully crafted illusion. I had to remind myself that the man I loved didn't exist in that illusion anymore. Finally, I made my decision. Not a decision of anger or spite, but of inevitability. I would confront him, not in the heat of emotion, but with evidence. I would show him the video, calmly, and let him see himself through my eyes, the man who had betrayed trust, broken vows, and underestimated the woman standing across from him. When the moment came, I did not scream. I did not cry. I handed him my phone and pressed play. The room was silent except for the faint sound of the video. I watched him watch himself, and for the first time in decades, I saw him falter. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try to explain. There was only silence, heavy and suffocating. And in that silence, I felt a strange release. The weight of years of doubt, suspicion, and quiet anxiety lifted from my shoulders. I finally felt free. What followed was difficult, inevitable conversations, legal consultations, emotional upheaval. Divorce proceedings, discussions with children, the awkwardness of mutual friends taking sides. But through it all, I carried a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. I had faced the truth. I had confronted betrayal. I had reclaimed my power. Looking back, I realize how fragile life is, how easily trust can be shattered, and how essential it is to stand up for oneself, even when it's painful. I also learned that strength isn't loud or violent. Sometimes strength is quiet, deliberate, and unwavering. Now, months later, I can think about that day without feeling crushed by betrayal. I am still rebuilding, still navigating the aftermath, but I am doing it on my own terms. I am learning to trust again, myself, first and foremost. And if there's one thing I want anyone reading this to understand, it's this: catching someone in the act isn't just about proof. It's about clarity, empowerment, and finally choosing yourself over someone who chose otherwise. So I ask you, those of you who've faced deception in your life, how do you reclaim your power when the person you trusted the most turns out to be someone you didn't really know at all?
I never imagined a single sentence could strike like a lightning bolt. But there it was, thrown over the table, casual, careless, like it meant nothing at all. "You're too old for me." I remember how the words hung in the air. I could hear them clearly, echoing in my mind, louder than the soft clinking of glasses or the faint hum of the ceiling fan. He didn't even look at me when he said it, as if he expected me to just nod, accept it, and move on. But how could anyone accept that? I froze. Not just for a moment, my body seemed to lock in place, like the world had shifted slightly on its axis and I was left behind. My heart raced, my chest tightened, and yet I didn't cry. Not immediately. I couldn't. The betrayal was too sharp, too real. And then my mind began to work. Not with rage, not with tears, but with something colder, something more dangerous: calculation. I thought about all the years I had poured into our relationship, all the small sacrifices no one noticed, the nights I stayed awake worrying, the laughter and love I gave freely. And for what? For him to dismiss me with 3 words, as if I were disposable? I could feel my hands trembling under the table, but I forced a smile. A calm, deliberate smile, the kind that hides a storm inside. Because I realized something in that moment, this wasn't the end. This was the beginning. I went home that night and sat in the quiet of my living room. The house was silent, my cat curled up beside me, and I stared at the blank screen of my laptop. That blank page was full of possibilities. Not revenge in the petty sense, not shouting or screaming. No, I wanted something bigger, something smarter. Something unforgettable. I began to write. Not directly about him, not yet. I wrote about feelings, about betrayal, about what it feels like to be dismissed for something you cannot change. I wrote about strength, wit, and the quiet power of patience. And then an idea hit me. Social media. My hidden weapon. A place where stories spread, where humor and cleverness could turn the tables faster than any confrontation ever could. I would create a story that captured my pain, my strength, my intelligence. But I wouldn't make it about shame. I'd make it about triumph. As I typed, memories surfaced, moments when he had subtly undermined me, laughed off my ideas, ignored my opinions, brushed aside my feelings. Each memory added fuel to the fire. And instead of anger, I felt excitement. Because I realized how easy it would be to turn all that underestimation into something the world would notice and celebrate. I planned my first post carefully. It had to be clever, witty, just enough for people to feel the bite of injustice without anyone knowing the full story. Humor first, revelation second, vindication last. I smiled as I typed the caption. Sometimes the world doesn't see your worth until you show it cleverly. Then I paused, imagining his face. What would he do when he saw it? Would he recognize himself in the story? Would he feel that tiny panic, that creeping realization that he had underestimated me, not just my age, but my mind? I shivered at the thought, a mix of thrill and satisfaction. The next morning, I watched the first reactions. Likes trickled in, comments appeared. People resonated. Finally, someone said it. Yes, I feel this. This is brilliant. It was a small start, but it felt enormous. I realized that this was bigger than just him. It was for every woman who had ever been dismissed, every person who had been told they were too much or too old. Every day, I added more, small clips, clever captions, subtle hints of the story I lived. I watched, analyzed, refined. And each post, each small revelation, built anticipation, not just for the public, but for him. By the end of the week, I had crafted the first full segment of my plan. It was subtle, sophisticated, and undeniably effective. And the best part? He had no idea. Yet. But soon he would. And in the quiet of my living room, I leaned back, breathing deeply. I realized then that anger fades, but cleverness lasts. That humiliation is temporary, but strategy can be eternal. And I was ready. Because he had made a mistake. A careless, casual mistake. And I had all the time, wit, and determination I needed to turn it into something unforgettable. Something viral. Something that the world, and he, would never forget. I went to bed that night not with tears, but with a smile, sharp and knowing. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt entirely in control. The following week, I woke up every morning with a strange, delicious tension in my chest. It wasn't anxiety exactly. It was anticipation. I had begun something, and now I had to see it unfold. I spent hours planning, filming, editing. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of craft. Every video had a purpose. Every caption, every frame, every carefully chosen word was part of the story. The first video was small, almost innocuous. Me, laughing at a minor, everyday mishap, with a caption that hinted at betrayal. They thought they knew me, they had no idea. I didn't name him. I didn't need to. The subtlety was what made it sting. As the hours passed, the video gained traction. Likes, shares, comments. People resonated. They laughed, they gasped, they wrote about their own experiences. And for the first time, I realized something amazing. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to anyone who had ever felt underestimated, ignored, dismissed. And then came the part one had been waiting for, the silent observation. He saw it. I knew it. The way he picked up his phone that evening, the pause, the slight narrowing of his eyes when he read the caption, I could almost feel the shock radiating from him through the screen. I didn't panic. I didn't gloat. I simply watched, savoring every tiny moment. He was beginning to realize that this wasn't just a casual post. This was a narrative. A narrative in which he had no control. Encouraged, I posted more. Clips of me tackling challenges, showing skill, humor, intelligence, always paired with captions that hinted at betrayal, resilience, and cleverness. Each post was a thread, weaving a tapestry that painted me as strong, witty, and untouchable. People began to comment, share their own stories, tag friends. The audience was growing exponentially. And with each like, each share, my sense of vindication grew. He began to ask questions, subtly at first. Who's posting these things? He'd say casually, as if he didn't care. But I could hear the edge in his voice. I could see the confusion. The worry. I maintained my calm. I never gave him direct answers. Not yet. The suspense was part of the story. The tension, the uncertainty, the anticipation, it made the reveal even more powerful. And then came a turning point. A comment appeared on one of my videos. Wow, she's brilliant. I wish I'd done the same years ago. And suddenly, I realized, this wasn't just entertainment. This was empowerment. For me, yes, but also for everyone watching. I began to incorporate small, clever jabs into my posts, witty, indirect, but unmistakable. Hints at being underestimated, hints at being dismissed for my age, hints at resilience and intelligence. Every post was like a breadcrumb, leading the audience, and him, toward the ultimate revelation. As the days went by, I watched his reactions more closely. The subtle frustration, the fleeting panic when a new post appeared, the way he would check his phone compulsively, it was intoxicating. Not cruelty, not revenge, it was justice served quietly, cleverly, publicly. I realized something then, the world loves a comeback story. People adore seeing cleverness triumph where arrogance once ruled. And I was giving them that story, in real time. And all the while, he remained unaware of the full scope. Each day, the tension built. Every post, every clip, every caption added to the narrative. The anticipation was almost unbearable, not just for him, but for me, too. By the end of the week, I had set the stage perfectly. People were watching, engaging, talking. And he was watching, too, trying to understand, trying to anticipate, trying to regain control. But the truth was, control had slipped away the moment he dismissed me. And in the quiet of the evening, when the world seemed still, I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Because I knew the next phase, my true triumph, was coming. And when it arrived, it would be unforgettable. The beauty of this setup was subtlety. The brilliance was in patience. And the power was undeniable. By the time the weekend arrived, my plan had reached a point I had been waiting for, the tipping point. The posts, the videos, the captions, they had all built momentum. The audience was hooked. People were commenting, sharing, laughing, gasping, and relating. The story had taken on a life of its own. And he was struggling to keep up. I could sense it, even from a distance. The way he picked up his phone compulsively, the way he scrolled through my posts, the slight tightening of his jaw, he was beginning to understand the scale of what he had underestimated. The final video was crafted with meticulous care. It wasn't angry. It wasn't spiteful. It was clever, witty, and undeniable. I had rehearsed the lines in front of the mirror, edited the clips until every frame conveyed subtle power, every caption hinted at triumph. I posted it late at night, when the world was quiet. I went to bed, pretending sleep would come easily, though my mind buzzed with anticipation. By morning, the world had noticed. Shares, likes, comments, they exploded. People tagged friends, wrote messages, quoted lines, laughed, cheered, and celebrated. My story had gone viral. And there he was, watching it all unfold. He finally saw the full picture. He recognized himself in the narrative, the subtle jabs, the cleverness, the strength I had displayed. And in that moment, I could almost hear the disbelief in his silent panic. The beauty of it wasn't humiliation, it was revelation. The world saw me as I truly was, clever, resilient, witty, unstoppable. And he saw what he had lost, not just a partner, but someone who could turn a cruel comment into a masterpiece of empowerment. I didn't need confrontation. I didn't need to argue or explain. The story spoke for itself. Every like, every share, every comment was a small victory, a whisper of vindication. And in watching the world cheer, he realized that his careless words had underestimated more than my age. They had underestimated my mind, my strategy, and my patience. The days that followed were surreal. Messages flooded in. People wanted to know how I did it, how I stayed calm, how I turned pain into power. And in quiet moments, I smiled to myself, knowing that my triumph wasn't just public, it was deeply personal. I reflected on the lessons I had learned. Age is never weakness. Being dismissed is not defeat. Patience and cleverness can be more powerful than anger. And underestimating a woman is a mistake that the world will notice long before the one who made it does. By the end of that week, I realized something extraordinary. The story had grown beyond me, beyond him. It had become a symbol, a reminder to everyone watching that strength, wit, and dignity are timeless. That being underestimated is an opportunity, not a setback. That cleverness, patience, and subtlety can create victories louder than any shouting ever could. And he had no words. Only a quiet recognition, perhaps a twinge of regret, but ultimately, respect. Not the respect he had demanded, not the respect he thought he owned, but the respect earned by seeing a woman rise above, triumph cleverly, and show the world her undeniable worth. I leaned back in my chair one evening, the screen glowing softly, the comments still streaming in. I realized then that my triumph wasn't about revenge. It was about visibility, empowerment, and reclaiming control over my own story. The power of being seen, celebrated, and undeniable, that was my victory. And as I closed the laptop, feeling a rare, complete sense of peace, I knew one truth: a woman who turns cruelty into cleverness, pain into power, and dismissal into triumph is unstoppable. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge is simply being celebrated by the world while the one who doubted you watches silently, unavoidably aware of what they lost. The world cheered. I thrived. And he learned a lesson he would never forget.